Welcome to the Home411 show. I'm your host, Linda Boosinger, and this is not our usual podcast. In the last 2 weeks since Hurricanes Helene and Milton, we have witnessed unimaginable devastation, heartbreak, and loss. We've also seen kindness, bravery, and unbreakable warlike bonds, bringing us together in ways we never thought possible. The devastation has ripped away not only the stunning beauty of our natural coast, but has left behind great loss. And to date, over 239 lives and growing. Even 20 days later, the agony persists as loved ones remain missing. I have been on the ground in Florida on and off for the last few weeks, trying to help those in need with my experience in FEMA and years in the construction world. I've heard and read while I'm there a lot of misguided information and really just wrong information. So I decided to quickly scramble to try to put together this podcast for all of us so that we may better understand how to get through this from our insurance perspective as well as the life-changing perspective. So I've asked two of my dearest friends to join us who were both affected by Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Now, Fawn, the best-selling author of 9 books and nominated 4 times for the Pulitzer Prize for her work in journalism, and a renowned motivational speaker, but of course to us, she's just our friend Fawn. Her passion for living and learning every single day in Florida, Fawn kayaks and swims and bikes, you name it. She loves the Florida lifestyle, and we love her. Now, James McKeever, who's here, I've had him on my podcast before, and he was really our top-rated podcast. He's the owner and principal agent of Dockside Insurance Group. 25 years of living and breathing insurance and FEMA. He worked Katrina. He worked Sandy. He's seen it all. James is truly the go-to guy here in Florida. And I can't say enough about James and his entire team and the knowledge they have when it comes to insurance. And trust me, you want them in your corner during these times of crisis. I have been helping other clients for the last couple of weeks try to fill out the forms and the text and the phone calls, because some of these big, what I call box insurance companies, you really are just a number. You need a local agent who understands you, your family, your home, and your community. Just take it from me. And if you're anywhere near Clearwater, Florida, give James a call. But I'm just grateful that they could both take this time earlier this week for all of us so we could debunk what I'm calling BS in some of these social media posts about say mold or don't say mold or say water filtration or whatever, or just listen to what James has to say. We had a great conversation. You're going to learn a lot. And if you have more questions, you can ask them in the comments, as I will be doing a part 2. Thank you for listening as always, and let's see what we had to say. Okay, Fawn, you've been my friend for years, and I know personally how deeply these hurricanes have affected you. Can you take us back to the moment that you first realized that Hurricane Helene, which was 100 miles off of the coast of Florida, had caused such catastrophic damage?
Yeah, I was walking my dog. My friend Julie was driving up the road in her Toyota FJ, and I knew that meant we were going to go for a ride and check out the damage after the storm. And so our friends Sam and John, they were out of town, so we checked their house. It was fine. So then I went over to my friend Sarah's house, and it wasn't. She'd been hit. She lived across from the Kellogg Mansion and had the full 5-foot flood surge. The water line was on the fence, and she was on a cruise in the middle of the Pacific, and I had to call her and tell her that, her house was pretty much done for. And, I have been so impacted by these storms, but the only damage that I suffered was one screen on my pool cage fell out.
Right.
So I had $50 worth of damage, and the community that I love is in pieces, and the entire coast is destroyed. And as a former news person, I understand the attention span of people who aren't in the middle of a crisis. So everybody from far and wide was texting, "Are you okay? What can we do? Are you safe?" But then they go on with their lives because nothing changes for them. And really, with Helene, after a certain point, nothing changed because it hit those houses near the water. And when you go over to the zone of destruction, which is far and wide and thousands of people, there's just so much agony because that they can't walk away from that. Right. That's their world. And yet when it's too much for us, we can retreat.
Well, and it's trying to get people outside of the know to understand, but also when you don't have damage on your own property, you almost have survivor's guilt that we all go through too. It's like, how do you help? So we all step in and we pitch in. And James, but just because you sell insurance doesn't mean you're immune. Your house also had some damage.
Yeah, we got 3 foot of surge in our house, and we were fortunate. Our house is elevated, so our front door is 12 feet in the air. So our surge was limited to our garage and our outdoor living area and our pool and fence and landscape.
But we've heard this for 25 years living in Florida. Storm surge. We know where the storm surge is, and we're used to that, right? Yep. I don't want to say crying wolf, but it kind of was like that. We're so used to it not affecting us. And then, so what did you say besides, oh shit, when you first saw the water's coming up, this is real, and you only had hours.
Yeah, and it came up really fast. I think the thing that caught my wife and I off guard, we stayed home. We knew it wasn't a wind event, that it was a water event, and I have some background with that. So we stayed home, and we watched the surge come in. And it was amazing that from when we first saw it on the street to when it was knee deep, getting up to chest deep was 10 or 15 minutes. I would have thought maybe hours, but it was just a matter of minutes.
It was.
And having grown up here my whole life and a third generation native to Dunedin, like you, we have that normalcy bias. I know we talked about earlier that we just didn't think it was going to happen. We were. It's interesting. We've lived in the house we're in for 20 years, and we did prep for surge for this one. We moved our cars and we raised things up out of the house, out of that lower living level. So we did okay with it. Oddly, this is the first one we've ever done that for. We've never prepped for one.
And what made you think this is the one? Because no, I didn't. I mean,
I think the media did a little bit better job on this one, saying we've gotten it wrong in the past. I heard them kind of subtly, the dog whistle there, the dog call of, hey, we didn't maybe get this right in the past. Take this one serious. And it was just such a monster storm. The eye wall and the size of the thing was just so huge. Yeah. It was hard to ignore. I don't know. But again, I have a background in it. But I have to say, even looking out my front door and down my street, a lot of my neighbors didn't prepare. They had that same kind of feeling that maybe this wasn't the one, and there were a lot of cars lost and property lost, and of course the homes that weren't elevated, right. like your friend that you mentioned earlier, they're not living in those homes. And I think you had a great observation that I've said to quite a few people. If you go 1 mile to the east, it's normal.
You're fine.
Yeah,
right?
It's fine. It's you can go out to dinner and have a nice dinner and get dressed up. Life's fine. You can change the channel, so to speak. But for those people that are living near the coast, this is it, sun up to sundown. It's interesting how that damage with Helene was so contained to the coastal communities.
And it's just so tragic because the ones they're people who they have resources. They're on the water. They have
sure.
But there are a lot of areas, and I'm curious what you have to say about this, where, like town and country, where you get middle-class people many of whom are paycheck to paycheck, and they have no flood insurance, and then boom.
Right, and can I just say that, because I do also live in Virginia and Florida, and when I'm sitting up in Virginia, I am seeing on the news all the sailboats for the boats, no offense.
Yeah.
All the boats are flipped over, and I'm like, okay, but it's not
First
like
world
that
problem.
here. Right,
Sure. Yeah.
It's not like that here. It's people who were living inland. I mean, they didn't, waters were coming from, water will go where it goes. As a construction company person, I know. So it wasn't just the rich living on the edge, and that's just what people think.
And the
really
mobile
wasn't.
home communities. I mean, just massive damage in these, wiping out an entire community, and they don't have a plan B. There is no plan B. Right. There's nothing left.
And, in traveling the country, I think I've worked for FEMA's National Flood Insurance as an outside contractor probably in 36 states, right? And so an observation of mine is that people that live in flood zones, it's one end of the spectrum or the other. They're high net worth coastal communities, like you referenced, or they're the opposite.
Yeah.
When you get into the inland states and the inland counties of even the coastal states, rich people don't build in low-lying areas. So especially if you look at what's going on up in Georgia and Tennessee and North Carolina, where I would argue they sustain more damage than we did in Florida, there's a huge amount of abject poverty. And I think that there are whole communities there that might not recover. Certainly lives won't recover. I think you'll see a slew of bankruptcies, a lot of Chapter 7s, a lot of lost real estate. But it's interesting. It's a great point that there's either high money on the coast or low money in the inland low-lying areas.
Well, okay, so let's see if we can try to help the listeners. I'm going to throw some questions
Sure.
at you, the insurance guy, and Fawn, please step in at any point. Okay, I got a question here. All right, what are the first steps homeowners should take after experiencing damage from a hurricane or a flood? And at the same time, what are these false social media BS that we're reading and hearing about when it comes to adjusters and claims and mold or flood waters or whatever they are? So
I'll try not to suck the air out of the room and take the whole podcast.
Yeah.
Step one, always remember it's not your insurance company's job to deny a claim. If you read your policy, it's your job to prove a claim, right? So first thing after a loss, document your loss. Take photos, take video,
Yep.
right? We want to be able to show the insurance company the damage you've sustained.
And what about, real quick, photos and videos before, like the hurricane's coming in?
That's helpful,
Right?
but for the
Don't
most
care?
part, yeah, well,
Okay.
we do care. And by we, I guess it's my old claims adjuster self. But, I think there's an assumption made that the house was not flooded before a certain date. It's hard to, if we're speaking specifically to flood, since Helene was a flood event, we could talk about Milton and wind damage. But, normally with a flood loss, if your house flooded, your neighbor's house flooded. So,
Okay.
the insurance company's going to assume it wasn't in a flooded state before that date. So the prior pictures are good, especially if, Hurricane Katrina, it just wiped out houses. There were nothing left but slabs. So in that instance, it's good to be able to justify kind of the
Yeah.
kind and quality of home and belongings you had. But aside from that, I think just documenting it right after the loss, getting damaged debris out of the house, you have an obligation to mitigate. If you read your policy, the insurance company wants you to get in there. They want you to tarp that roof. They want you to tarp those windows. They want you to pull the damaged items out of the house. And if you don't, if you say, I just don't feel like it, this isn't my job, and your house gets worse, maybe mold starts growing on the ceilings, things really go
Yeah.
south, that's not covered by the insurance policy. So step one's document. Step two is mitigate those damages, and then give your insurance company, or better yet, your agent a call, kind of explain what happened, and then get the claim started.
Okay, and let's talk about the BS.
Yeah, yes. So I'm seeing it now. I mean, we're living in the time of social media, right? And there just is some bad information. There's a viral post going around. I'm sure if you're on social media, you've seen it by now. We first saw it in North Carolina. We're in some local groups up there like you. We have a home in North Carolina as well, so we're in a couple states. But we saw it in those groups where obviously there's so much less flood insurance than there is here up in the mountain states, right? Who would have thought that it,
26,000.
Yeah, who would have thought at that elevation it would flood the way it did? So there's just, I think in the county we're in, which is Yancey County, North Carolina, something to the effect of 2% of properties had flood insurance. It's a really low number. And that even might be high. It was like 60-something properties had flood insurance. So people are desperate, and I get it. And so there's some social media posts going around about don't use the word flood when you talk to your insurance company. Use the word water intrusion. That doesn't matter. I mean, that's
Same thing.
Let's debunk that. That's utter nonsense. And the thing is, I've seen licensed insurance or proclaimed licensed insurance agents get on these posts and validate that information. And I don't know, it's just if they live inland and they don't understand flooding. I don't want to call out one of my colleagues. Certainly there's good and bad insurance agents like anything, doctors and lawyers and accountants. We have good and bad. But to validate that, it's just a nonsense thing. The insurance companies have been doing this quite a while. If they come out to your house, they know the difference between a flood or wind-driven rain or a pipe break or a fire. You can call it whatever you want when you call your claimant or you speak to them. Not using a certain word is not going to change how the policy responds,
Right.
or if you needed a separate policy. So that's number one. I think the second one, there's some information I'm seeing people want to lean on to public adjusters. I've ran into some.
Now explain what that is.
Sure.
You can get your own public adjuster.
Sure. So you can get your own adjuster to represent you for an insurance claim, and they're called public adjusters. They hold an adjuster's license the same way a carrier adjuster does, and their job, and they're paid a percentage of your claim. So where it gets interesting is I think more people have dealt with maybe a homeowner's claim or an auto claim at some point in their life. And we know the insurance companies, they're not showing up trying to pay you all they can pay. Good ones do. I know that's hard to believe, but there are some really good insurance companies that they know if they owe the loss, they pay the loss. They have just great followings, great ratings. They do a good job. There are some that aren't. Insurance companies are like any other company in the world. You can go to a restaurant and get a really good aged ground beef hamburger, or you can go to McDonald's and get a hamburger. We can call them both a hamburger, but they're very different.
Right.
And it's the same thing with a homeowner's policy. It's important not to commoditize it in our brain. They're different and carriers treat it differently. So that said, if you're dealing with an insurance company that's been a problem to deal with and you want to get a public adjuster to represent you, that's your right to do so, and you're going to pay part of your claim for that. I think flood insurance is different because in most cases, those claims are reimbursed to the carrier by the National Flood Insurance Program. So the insurance company, the purse strings are a little less tight in those scenarios. And if we want to talk about a dirty little secret, those insurance companies are paid a percentage of the loss. So if your flood claim is maybe $80,000, and if it was a private entity paying that loss and maybe they were going to try to save some money, give that back to the stockholders, with flood insurance it doesn't work like that. If the carrier can justify the $80,000 and they make a percentage of it, they're going to pay the $80,000. And in almost all instances, the flood insurance adjuster is also paid a percentage of the claim. Right? I mean, that's amazing, and I get that look a lot, right? But it's true.
Like your head is spinning,
So
actually.
they would just be handing out right and left.
So long as they can justify it, you have to understand.
want to
Yeah, this is
make-
public money, right? So, these claims are audited by people with badges and guns. This is the federal government's behind it. So they have to justify the loss and the payment. So my message here is if you have a flood claim, and I know some of my colleagues I've seen on social media have made posts about always get a public adjuster, bar none. And I just respectfully disagree. They probably haven't been through a flood loss. You already have one adjuster on site getting paid a percentage of your claim. Obviously, it's in their best interest to maximize that claim, right? But their percentage is paid for by the insurance company.
Right.
If you want to spend 10% of your money, go for it. My advice is maybe wait a minute before you sign for the public adjuster. See what the insurance company is going to offer first. Be a good poker player. Show me your cards first. If you don't like them, then you have that opportunity.
Right. Now, can you address the mold one? There's a BS about the mold. Don't say the word mold. Now, is it true that what they're saying is that the insurance basically gets kicked out and now it's a mold policy?
No. So, and it gets a little bit different with homeowners and flood, right? So homeowners insurance has some mold provisions in it. So we'll focus on flood since I think a lot of
That's
this
the-
dialogue, is
right.
really resulting from
Milton.
flood losses. If you read a flood insurance
Helene.
policy, Helene, yeah. If you read a flood insurance policy, it really doesn't cover mold, but it will cover mold prevention. And if I'm reading the tea leaves, the people that wrote this language, which at this point is over 50 years old, the thinking is that if you get in there and mitigate the way you should mitigate, you shouldn't get mold. So if you mitigate the way you're supposed to mitigate. So if you go in and you rip out the sheetrock and you dry out the building and you treat it with a mildicide, which is all covered, no problem.
Right.
We will pay you to stop the mold. But if you get mold growing on your ceiling because you were on a vacation and didn't come home for a few weeks, that's not covered.
Right.
All right, but what if it's somebody like me who lives alone, doesn't know how to rip all this stuff out, and there are millions of other houses, well, not millions, but thousands of other that need people to do
Sure.
the same thing, so I may not be able to find someone to do it for me. And then the mold comes and it's still not going to be covered.
Because it comes within 24 hours. You've seen it. And then it just keeps getting worse as the days progress.
Yep. So, your question's a fair question because there is a supply and demand issue after a loss. We've seen that. And that's a tricky one. So long as you can document you made your best efforts, and I'll go with a more extreme example. So let's talk about maybe we saw some losses on the barrier islands. We'll talk about Clearwater Beach. We know they had those causeways shut down and the homeowners
Yeah.
couldn't get out there. If they had mold, generally in my past experience, the policy will pay for that because, the federal government can see there was an access issue, no problem, we understand. Certainly after Hurricane Katrina, for those that remember Katrina, for weeks and weeks people couldn't get into their properties. Well, there was mold growing everywhere. No problem. The policy responded and covered all that. The policy just doesn't want to pay for somebody to not make their best efforts.
Well, even in Tennessee, where you can't even, the roads are gone.
Right.
You can't even get to the homes. I mean, you can't even find the homes for a lot of the people.
Yeah,
You know
I
what I mean? It's just, so, I'm going to kind of skip to the next thing a little
Sure.
bit because you touched on it. Most people have flood insurance and they have the $250,000.
Sure.
And what I have found mostly is that people are thinking, okay, I'm going to get a check for $250,000. And that is not the case. So explain how that actually works,
Sure. So I'll insurance nerd out on you for a minute.
please.
So Florida is what's called a valued policy state. And what that means is for homeowners insurance, let's say your building limit for your house is $400,000 and your house burns to the ground, the insurance company is going to give you a check for $400,000. It's an agreed upon value. That changes state to state, but for Florida, that's where we are. Flood is not valued. Remember, flood policies are almost always kind of administered or governed from a federal level, and they're not valued. So there are some scenarios where you can overinsure a house, and I'll give a great example. You and
Perfect,
I
yeah.
spoke, kind of briefly before this started. We've seen mobile homes down in the Keys where they're maybe 30, 40, 50 years old. People paid $800,000 because they have a water view. But the structure itself isn't worth $30,000. It's a depreciated single wide, right? So the insurance agents down there will write a $250,000 flood policy on it. Then the adjuster shows up on a severe loss, and they give them a check for 30, and the property owner, in their mind, I've been paying premiums on 250 all these years.
Right.
It doesn't work like that, right? So that's problem number one with flood insurance. They're not valued policies. It's a direct physical loss policy. So the way that the policy works, if the flood water touches something, the policy will pay to replace or repair it, whatever the case may be. So consequential loss, which is where kind of circles back to the mold earlier, right? That would be a consequence of the flood some days later. It doesn't cover consequential losses or indirect losses. So if you get, let's say, 2 feet of water in your house and the direct physical damage for the contractor to come in, rip that out, replace your flooring, your drywall, your cabinets, your appliances, if that adds up to $140,000, that's what the policy is going to pay, $140,000, not the $250,000. And if the water went up maybe to your roof or it washed your whole house away, sure, there's a scenario there where it could pay the $250,000. But if it's a partial loss or a couple of feet of water, $250,000 isn't guaranteed. And I've heard it from people.
Yeah.
I've had the question posed, what can I do to get the full $250,000? And my answer is have $250,000 in damage. But if you only have $150,000 in damage, that's what you're going to get paid.
And the FEMA 250 doesn't cover contents automatically. You have
Right.
to get that separate.
It's
Is that a
separate.
separate policy completely?
No, it's the same policy, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just you would add contents limit to your flood policy. It will be a second deductible, and you can buy up to $100,000 for a single-family home on contents. A lot of people don't. We're all price sensitive, right? I get it. So some people left that off. But yeah, contents would be a separate line.
Is there any instance where a hurricane wind policy kicks in a situation like that?
Sure. So let's say somebody's house flooded. Maybe they had a foot of water in it, and at the same time, in parallel, during that event, a tree fell on the roof and water rained in. That would be the homeowners company responding to that. Where they would pay to fix the roof and maybe fix the ceiling drywall. Maybe it's a 2-story house, so maybe they're paying to repair the second floor. But there is no scenario where homeowners insurance is going to pay for the same damage that a flood policy will pay. That would be double indemnity.
Right.
Right. So if you think of insurance, it's to make you whole, not to profit. The principle of indemnity is that. So one or the other will pay for the damage.
And if your roof blows up and if it floods from that, that's wind.
That's wind. Yeah, so flood has a specified definition. And flood has to be normally dry land that's inundated with water, crossing 2 or more properties or 2 or more acres. And the street's a property line.
Wait, say that again.
Normally dry land,
Okay,
completely inundated with water,
okay.
an area of 2 or more properties or 2 or
Okay.
more acres.
So if your pool overflows, does it meet?
Hopefully it crosses the property line. But there is a scenario where you can have a water loss to your home, a groundwater loss that is significantly confined to your property. Maybe it just comes in the back door and it doesn't cross the property line. There's a scenario there where a flood policy might not respond.
Well, and I think that goes into the question is what role does flood and then homeowners play in a hurricane? Because, okay, let's say the storm drain out front overflows and it comes into your house, or a neighbor's pool overflows and it comes to your house
So
during a hurricane.
Yep, and both of the, so flood is a little agnostic on what caused it, right? So the flood policy doesn't care that it's a hurricane or a rain event or whatever the case is, or a teenager drives down the road and hits a fire hydrant and it floods the street, and we have palm trees in Florida, right? So those palm branches plug up the storm sewer and then that water runs into your garage. No hurricane involved, the flood policy doesn't care. It has the definition that we talked about. And so long as it meets that definition, then the policy will respond. So to your question,
But storm surges flood.
it is.
Even during a hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
So your hurricane isn't going to kick in. Your storm surge is going to kick in.
Well,
or
it's
your
still a
flood
flood,
is going to
right.
kick
Right.
in.
Yep.
But if the roof blows off, the water's coming down during a hurricane,
That's
hurricane.
Mm-hmm.
But still, many of us are worried about our pools.
Mm-hmm. Rightfully so.
So what's the story there?
There-
Okay, because the power goes off, you can't empty any more water out.
You can't. Nope. And it can overflow, into the house. And I've seen those claims where there's a scenario where there's a gap in coverage.
So no wind and no flood.
I don't want to speak for the individual homeowner's policy, but I believe that there are going to be some homeowners carriers out there that would deny that loss. It's not enough to trigger the flood. Remember, flood has to cross 2 or more properties
Yeah.
or 2 or more acres. So in your example of did the
Storm drain.
that's no problem. The storm drain's no problem because the street's a property. So you've triggered the flood policy with that, with the storm drain.
The street.
The street's a property line, right? So, but to your question with the pool, if it overflowed and just came in your back door, that water was in an area of 10 square feet, maybe didn't cross a property line, I could see a coverage issue.
Well, some of us weren't able to get hurricane insurance. Remember there was a little time where we couldn't even get hurricane insurance? So, okay, a hurricane comes. Is there any point where homeowners insurance would kick in? Any scenario during a hurricane that you're not for flooding,
Sure.
but hurricane that a homeowner's okay.
So for us, it's all homeowners insurance. There's no separate hurricane insurance. It's just homeowners insurance.
That adds hurricane.
Yeah, well, it's not even that. If you read, I'll insurance nerd out, I'm sorry. If you read the ISO policy language, a homeowner's insurance policy would cover wind by default. Where it gets a little tricky in Florida, if it's an older home, maybe with an older roof, or maybe it's just it's a price issue, then we can write homeowners and policies that exclude the wind. So it isn't that the policy out of the box doesn't cover it. Out of the box, it does cover it. All the carrier's saying is, hey, Linda, your roof's 27 years old. You need a roof, or you're right on the water with your 1910 wood frame house. So instead of $20,000, yeah, right.
It sounds like me.
Sounds like where I'd like to live too. But instead of your $25,000 premium, if you let us take wind off, we'll give it to you for $3,000. And so that's the scenario we get into. It isn't that there's separate hurricane coverage.
Okay.
The problem with a policy that excludes hurricane is it excludes all wind. So it excludes that tornado maybe that happens in January too. So those non-wind policies can be a little dangerous, but they're out there.
Well, I highly suggest you talk to somebody and get the wind mitigation.
Absolutely.
Because it doesn't cost much to update your roof to be able to, with some extra hurricane clips or whatever we do to help clients out.
And that pays dividends, right? So we see
Yes, it does.
people paying, $5,000 or $6,000 a year for homeowners insurance, and they go get hurricane clips, and it reduces their
Yes.
premium by $1,000 a year
It's
every
big deal.
year. I mean, that's a great ROI. So I think that those are things that people should look into and have a conversation with their agent about it.
Upgraded garage door.
So with opening protection, right, doors and windows, the trick to that is all of the doors and windows have to be upgraded to wind resistant.
And don't put glass in your hurricane or in your garage doors because that will.
You can. There's impact glass. My garage doors are impact
Now
rated with glass.
they have it now.
Yeah, but they don't give them away.
Old school, yeah.
We had a client, this is real, if you'll let me go off dialogue for a second. We had a client spend a ton of money getting all new hurricane doors and windows, got the wind $40,000, got the wind mitigation, sent it in for a discount. They couldn't get the discount because they didn't do the skylights.
Oh.
All doors and windows have
All
to be
entry.
upgraded. All
basically.
entry.
Oh,
Any way
wow.
the wind can get in.
Yep.
That's why we talked about the
Any
garage
way
doors.
the wind can get in. So to your question about garage doors, has to be all the openings.
So let's make it even more complicated. Let's talk about condos or stacked living, as you call it.
Yeah, condo. So if condos, there's a legal, differentiation in the ownership of a condo. And I think where there's some confusion maybe after Helene with the flooding, I think plenty of people have contractors and condo associations and condo unit owners have experience with losses, maybe a fire loss or a pipe break. I know we see plenty of those claims where the unit above you, maybe the toilet overflows and it leaks water into the unit. In those scenarios, you're responsible for your own interior of your unit, right? You're responsible for your drywall, your flooring, your cabinets, your doors, your appliances. Flood's a little bit different in that flood is, again, governed at the federal level, It usurps the state laws. It usurps the condo docs. In flood insurance policies, the Master Condo Association policy pays for all interior building damage. So it isn't the unit owner that's responsible for that damage. And I know there's plenty of unit owners that have building coverage on their unit owner's policy. They need to take a strong look at those. There are very, very narrow scenarios where that coverage is ever going to respond. The contents, yes, you're always going to be responsible for your furniture, your couches, your clothing, your decor. But the building damages on a flood would be handled by the association.
Wow. Well, so talking about FEMA, and I've been in this for, this 50% rule, I've been fighting for historic preservation because our city has a 5-year rule. The regulation for the federal 50% FEMA rule is 1 year. Can you explain what the 50% rule is and how is that affected when we have a flood? Let's go for the 1 year regulation. Does
Sure.
it recalculate? Let's say if I renovated in November or in June, finished renovating and I've used up my 50% for the year, hurricane comes in September, does that restart the 1 year clock or how does this work? Explain what it is to begin with.
You might know more about this. We should be asking you this question. I'm no expert in the 50% rule. I probably know enough just to be dangerous. But with the 50% rule, I'll say this, that when you're calculating money that goes into a home, right? So what we want to understand about the 50% rule is it isn't just as the result of damages, it's the result of renovations and improvements. And again, you have more expertise there than I do. When the local municipality, and it's different, obviously city to county to city to county, when they're looking at the money that's spent in a home, there are ways that money spent doesn't have to count towards the 50%. So if you re-roof your home, that doesn't count towards the 50%. That's a maintenance item.
Well, let's just say sometimes
Some.
it doesn't.
It's not supposed to.
If it's an emergency, it doesn't. But if you're choosing to renovate and replace your roof, it does.
And pools, I know pools can be not factored in because
Right.
FEMA doesn't cover those on the flood policy.
And it's also, per structure.
Mhm.
So you have
Oh, yeah.
3 structures. You have your, then you have a separate garage. Your
Yep.
garage has an amount and your house has an amount. And people buy a house, let's say they pay $500,000 for it, and they think, okay, well, it's $250,000.
Right.
It's not how it works
Nope.
because it's not about the land. It's about the actual structure. And for historic properties especially, this is where I come in and they're 100 years old. Well, the houses are only worth $80,000. So I can only fix them up using $40,000.
That's right.
It's not possible in today's market. So I apologize, but
No, you're right. And look, there's a huge knowledge gap that people don't understand the difference between replacement cost value of the structure and market value. So this same $500,000 home you're talking about, if we elevate it, pick it up with a helicopter and move it out to Florida Beach, it's a $5 million home. But the rebuild cost of the building remains the same. It's maybe $200,000 or $80,000 in your scenario. So step one is understand when you're talking about the 50% rule, it has nothing to do with the market value. You paid $5 million for your home, doesn't mean you have $2.5 million to put in
Right.
and not triggered. It's just the value of that building. Where I think things get tricky after a flood, all of it counts on the flood damages, right? There is no kind of carve out for maintenance or these other things. It's a rolling 12-month calendar. So if you have a flood claim, what was Helene, September 26th?
yes.
I think is when it hit. So, if you have damages that occurred after that, now you're looking at your trailing 12 months as you go through the next 12 months. So if those damages exceed 50%, then you could be made to bring your house up to current flood code.
But if my land is worth $400,000, my house is only worth $100,000, that means my 50% is only $50,000.
Right.
Even if you gave me a check for $250,000, I can't spend the $250,000. I can only spend $50,000. Right?
That's right.
Are we on the same page
Well,
here?
you can spend it once you elevate your house.
Well, that's why they
Yes.
want you to do it. That's why they have the rule, is
That's
so
why they
you
have it.
elevate your house.
Yep. And here's the problem with the rule.
But
Yeah.
you have to pay out of your pocket to elevate the house. There's no funding. I know there are grants. that
Well,
you
there
can
is
look
some. The
into,
policy, so
grants.
all flood policies have what's called ICC coverage, increased cost of compliance coverage. So every flood policy has $30,000, right, of coverage for that. You can't voluntarily tap into that, right? It has to be mandated by your local municipality. So they have to send you a letter saying, Linda Boo, you've breached the 50%, we're gonna make you elevate your house. And that triggers your policy then to pay out up to $30,000.
Oh.
Here's the rub. You're not elevating a house for
No.
$30,000. 80, 100, maybe on a moderate home. So now you're out of pocket on that differential.
And if you can even, because if
Sure.
it's
Slab on
frame
grade.
versus block, right,
Yep.
exactly. And I know moving houses, because again, historic preservation, we do this all the time, it costs $60,000 for me to move a house a half a block.
Right.
Can't imagine how much it's going to cost me to raise one.
Yep. There's going to be some pain points on the 50% rule, I think, out of this. I think it's really misunderstood. And I think that I think some people are going to get a little caught off guard with it. And the problem is there's no one ringing the bell. Once the municipality tells you you've breached it, you're elevating your house, you're not walking it back. There's no taking that back.
Right.
So by elevating the house, does that then mean that the ground floor cannot have any rooms of use?
That's correct. The ground floor can't have any rooms of use, much like the house I live in, which is why, great, I got 3 feet of surge, and it wrecked a couple of weekends of cleanup, but we stayed in our home. We had no
Right.
living. But here's where it gets even a little more dicey. We're talking about kind of bad information out there. A lot of people in homes like mine are ones when they elevate them and they have that kind of foundation area that they use as a garage, a lot of people want to make that some living space. Let's make a spare bedroom, a game room, a bathroom. Your flood policy doesn't cover that.
Right.
So
And can I just say, because this has happened before, if you put a bathroom in or something that's not, and you try to sell it, you
Doesn't
can't.
count.
Right. Well, also, it may stop
can't
the
what?
sale.
Sure.
It may stop the sale of your home, and this has happened multiple times. Clients have pulled me in to actually demo these things out.
'Cause they're not
they
permitted.
They lose the sale. Right, exactly.
So you can't have living space in a home that's built after the flood code. You can't have living space down in the base flood elevation, right? So, and a lot of people do, and then they're absolutely caught off guard that, oh, I'm sorry, the drywall's not covered, your garage doors aren't covered. Now, older homes are grandfathered in. So you see all these old bungalows in Dunedin, and they got, water in them from the damage. We talked about some mutual friends earlier. Those are fine. They're what we call pre-firm. They're built before the flood code. There's really no punitive effect. But if you have those newer elevated homes and you put those finishes down below, then you have a problem. And even your contents aren't covered down there. So for us, like we had, all, Christmas decor and tools and stuff, those items aren't covered.
Did we finish the condo thing? Talking about?
Sure.
Did we?
Yeah, I think. Unless there's something that, maybe I missed.
So, but these associations have a lot of responsibility then for that.
And people should check their condo docs and read through them and get proof of what is insured and read the insurance policy that the HOA has purchased on your behalf.
Absolutely. Make
That's
sure
how I do it.
make sure it's current. And I got to tell you, if there is a claim, and then the HOA, obviously, their master, it's called an RCBAP, which is Residential Condominium Building Association Policy. That master flood policy, as we talked about, pays for all those building damages for everybody's unit. So the association's going to get a great big check for all those, and it can be a really big check. Now each unit owner has to work with the association to carve out their part of that check. Because certainly each unit's different. Some unit's going to have higher end appliances and cabinets.
Right.
Another one may have just spec grade, kind of Home Depot grade cabinets and appliances. So, there's a little bit of work there after that happens on a flood that occurs in a condo unit.
How many claims did you have?
For this event,
For both of them, yeah.
I'd have to look. Probably, no, we're a small office in Dunedin, right? So we have maybe 3,800 clients. We probably had 350 claims.
But as someone who's helping people do this, that's a lot of work.
It is. Oh, it's a ton of work.
Emails and phone calls and
Yeah.
meetings, appointments, and
Haven't slept
forms
much
and-
in a couple weeks.
Yeah,
It's a
no.
lot of work.
Right.
And our plug for us, right, is I have a claims background, and certainly most insurance agents don't. And I think that's the value add that we give to our clients, not that the podcast is about promoting our business. I don't mean it to be that, but
No, but because one of the clients I'm helping now, they have an agent in Largo, and they don't respond. They're not helping. This is why I'm helping,
yeah.
because they're not
we
getting
see
the
it a lot.
service that you're providing.
Yeah, and I think our clients know that. The ones that know me better, know that we have that kind of claims background, so they're tapping into that and utilizing that, and that's what we're here for.
That's right.
Yeah,
I'd be
we're happy to
calling
do
you.
it. Yeah.
Fawn, and I know you can jump in on this too, but how does this teach us where we're over or even under insured, and especially the over, as we're talking about
Wait,
this.
and with what you'd said earlier before we were talking about we're all in a flood zone.
Yeah, and let's touch on that first, right? And this is a big one for me. I'm going to jump up on my soapbox here for a minute because I've heard a lot of people say it, even before today in the last few weeks. I'm not in a flood zone or an evacuation zone yet, ... So I think step one is to kind of separate out, to decouple evacuation and flood zones in our vocabulary. Evacuation zones serve a very real purpose and a specific purpose. And certainly, if you're in a flood zone, you don't have to be in an evacuation zone, and vice versa. There are properties over here on Edgewater Drive in Dunedin that stare across the street to the water, and they're not in a flood zone. They're certainly in an evacuation zone, though. So we just want to decouple that in our dialogue. I'm of the opinion if you live in Florida, you're in a flood zone. I mean, there maybe are some parts in the center of the state that have that kind of high ridge over by Winter Haven or Winter Park, whatever, over there where Bach Tower is. I know they're 300 and something feet up. Okay, there's an argument there maybe. Of course, the people in the mountains probably aren't buying that argument at the moment. But everybody in Florida is in a flood zone. So if you live in Pinellas County, specifically Dunedin, you're in either a B or a C or an X. Those are just 500-year flood zones. Just because your mortgage company doesn't make you carry flood insurance, you're still in a flood zone. And I think that's where people are getting a little confused.
Well, and they also just think about the coast. They're not thinking about
Sure.
all of those little ponds and lakes and that are, especially in our area.
And
They're
let's call
everywhere.
some people in the mountains right now. The coast doesn't matter with flooding. It's right. So just because my message to you today, for anybody listening, watching, just because your mortgage company doesn't require you to carry flood insurance does not mean you're not in a flood zone. You're in a flood zone. You're just not in a severe enough flood zone that your mortgage company cares. You can still flood and you should still have flood insurance.
And I purchased it for $400. I mean, it doesn't have to be the most expensive thing,
Sure.
especially if you're not in a flood zone. But I think our concern is, okay, what's going to happen now? And is it going to be affordable to even live here anymore?
The insurance companies have priced, as weird as this sounds, and so this is the thinking in our world, the insurance companies have priced in events like this. They have reinsurance, which reinsurance is just insurance for insurance companies. They have reinsurance on these events. The computer modeling's pretty good. They know what to expect year after year. I think the price instability that we've seen in Florida for the last few years really comes down to litigation. I think there's been some really good tort reform. Linda, I know you and I spoke on this on a prior podcast. Some good tort reform passed in Florida in the last couple of years. I think that's going to curb some of that. But as far as these natural act of God storms, I think the insurance companies have priced it in. I don't think that it's going to see the massive price swings following this that maybe people are worried about. That's not my chief concern.
Fawn, I kind of mentioned it earlier about warlike bonds, and I'm a military family, so I know what that means. How do you feel like what sticks out for you that the community came together after this? Because obviously,
Well, I think it was, I don't feel like I have survivor guilt. I feel like as a community, we just felt survivor gratitude. And so because of that, we wanted to do for other people who were suffering and step up. And so we've all been through something. Everybody's exhausted. I have no damage. I am exhausted. Everybody has been through it. It was the 1-2 punch. It was too much. Can't have another storm this year, right? We're done. And it amazed me in my neighborhood. I live in a real Brady Bunch kind of neighborhood, and they're just really great people. And that my pool, I kept dumping the water out, dumping it out, and then I lost power, and then it was going to breach. And my neighbor 2 doors down said, we have 3 buckets and 4 people. And this is in the worst part of the hurricane. She says, that water will not get in your house. No. And then another neighbor had evacuated, and they had gotten a call from somebody, a snowbird that lives next to them, say there's a sewer grate behind. It needs to be raked off so it doesn't flood your house. And she posts it, and the storm started already. And I write, well, the storm has started. And then 2 other neighbors put on their raincoats, and they go clear it off. And that sense of community, I think, has gotten much stronger.
A lot of sirens for a few
Yeah.
weeks after the storm.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah, it's amazing the amount of emergency vehicles.
Yeah, it just doesn't stop. But, I think everybody's got that. We're in it together. We want to help. And at the same time, a feeling of how much more of this can I look at? And that's where we're getting. And I know people also who have gone on with their lives and have never driven to see the coast. You have an obligation to know what's going on in your community. This was a catastrophic event twice. And we need to know what we have to do so that we can get through it, because we are so far from being done.
Right.
And
I mean, drove by this morning and there's all that stuff still
yeah.
out there on the road. I mean, it hasn't gone anywhere, and why it didn't blow away. But yeah, I feel like the community really pulled together, especially in your neighborhood.
We saw it too in ours and where we live. Yeah, it's it really kind of refreshed my outlook on the human spirit and watching neighbors help each other. I'm not nearly as articulate as you. You've stated it great, but it's true that people move on very, very quickly. They do get on with their lives. They do change the channel. And this recovery is going to take a really long time. There are parts up in the Panhandle where Helene made landfall, up in Keaton Beach, where 90% of all structures are gone. It's not that they're going to go in and replace the drywall. The structures
Right.
aren't there anymore. So that recovery is 6 months, a year, 2 years. Lives are changed. We know there's a lot of people without insurance. That's going to be a tough one. FEMA assistance is not going to be enough, undoubtedly. But I really did see a lot of people help each other out. I saw smiles on my neighbors' faces that I haven't seen in years. That just, hey, what can I give you a hand with? People just going up and down the street, handing out lunch, and people would walk up our driveway as we're pressure washing and cleaning up and handing you hamburgers and hot dogs. Just
Right.
neighbors I'd never met that lived 3 blocks over.
And the lesson with it, because we talk so much about how divided the country is.
Mm-hmm.
And this month especially, we hear that, right? But the people in my neighborhood, it's 50% red, 50% blue, and none of that matters. And that's the truth, is we all are good people wanting goodness. We want good lives. And so that was really life affirming to see that. It made me feel safe and loved.
I feel the same way. There's certainly more that unites us than divides us. And I guess if there's one positive thing out of a natural disaster is you did get to see that in the human spirit.
Yeah.
And it really was uplifting.
Okay, so I have one big question for you. One really big
You
question.
saved the best for last.
I did. Okay, so we're hearing all about these low checks coming in to people, but mostly if everybody watched the 60 Minutes interview and the fraud and we can explain that a little bit better if you want, but how can we protect ourselves? How can we know that the check that we're getting or the reports that we're getting actually, and I'll go back a little bit because I was having breakfast this morning and the guys beside me came in from a different state. They were adjusters, and they were talking about insulation. And here we insulate in the walls. Not everybody insulates in the walls in other states. So we're made me a little bit worried about, okay, does he understand how we build? We have Durarock and all the wet zones. Not everybody does. So how do we make sure that the adjuster is understanding how we build here in Florida and how that's different? And are we getting everything that we should be getting?
Sure. No, both are fair questions, and they are two different questions. So I watched the 60 Minutes interview, and of course I'm an agent for most of these carriers, so take my answer with that in mind. The step one is, does the adjuster know what they're doing? Look, 20-something years ago, I adjusted it. At some point, I adjusted my first claim, right? Every police officer makes their first arrest, and every doctor performs their first surgery. I would love to go back and readjust my first 100 claims. So there's nothing like experience, right? I think working with a contractor from day one and letting the contractor review what the insurance company is proposing. Now, if something isn't covered, so we'll talk about flood insurance, right? Flood insurance doesn't cover swimming pools, doesn't cover the pumps, doesn't cover the heaters, anything in that nature. So if you're looking through your claim report and the contractor says, I'm good with the drywall, I'm good with the cabinets, your pump's missing, well, that's just because the policy doesn't cover it. But if the contractor goes through the thing and says, I don't see the insulation on here, you just call the adjuster, point it out. The adjuster, if they're a good adjuster, is going to say, shoot me a quick picture. Even if you've ripped out the insulation, there's a little bit of trace left behind. There's a nail head you didn't get that's got a little on it. Snap a picture, send it to your adjuster, they'll add it to the worksheet. That shouldn't be a problem. As far as what the insurance companies were doing on the other end of it, most of these adjusters, after these catastrophic losses, they're independent adjusters. They don't work for the insurance companies.
Right, they go home.
They go home. So they have an unbiased take on this, and that's perfect. That's, for a society, that's great. For the industry, that's great.
But we can't get their report from them.
You couldn't.
You couldn't.
You couldn't. So, yeah, a law was changed. So when the 60 Minutes report, I watched it, and again, it's a real concern.
It's fresh.
It is. But the laws are a little different since that thing aired or since it was put together. So under the old law, the insurance companies would take the independent adjuster's report, as that piece had pointed out, and the carrier would change it. They would modify it. I don't know what their intentions were. I don't want to comment on any of that, but it happened. Now there's a law, at least a state law in the state of Florida, that's already been signed and put into effect, that the insurance companies can't do that without noting, here's what the original adjuster, the field adjuster put down, and here's what we've changed, in the name of the person that made that change. Because remember, we're all licensed.
Right.
We all have to
Right.
report to the State Department of Financial Services,
Right.
including, the inside desk examiners. So now there's going to be better transparency on that. So when you get that report, you can see where the adjuster maybe put on there, he thinks you need a new roof, and the insurance company thinks you can patch it. Now those notes are there, and it's a red flag for you, and you can seek additional guidance, whether that is a public adjuster or a contractor, or in the worst case scenario, an attorney. We have a legal system for that. But I think the one thing that 60 Minutes report missed is that update in the law, that we're going to have better transparency now. And that's good. That's great consumer protection. That practice was a practice that probably should have never happened.
Peer review, right? Understand that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Fawn?
Well,
About
I
the 60
think we
Minutes
have the
report?
whiz here.
Right?
I mean, I loved the first episode of Linda's podcast with you because I learned so much from it. And I just think you're the greatest resource here. So I'm glad I got to sit in and hear it. And I'm just grateful to have time with you. Move home.
Well, I'll say this, if we do this again and you do the intro, let mine go first. I don't want to come after
I know, I
Fawn's.
thought
I thought, man, there's
doing it. I
the
know.
incomparable
I know.
Fawn Germer. Don't put me to second seat. And as far as insurance knowledge, we all have to be good at
Right.
something. But yeah, it's
Well,
we're happy to help.
Since we have all been through it, what is the one thing you would do differently before the storm?
Oh well,
And the
that's
difference between like Helene and Milton, we're different people.
Sure.
Even between that gap. What would you do differently?
my answer is going to be textbook. It's going to be trite. You're going to hate it. But talk to your insurance. Have a conversation once in a while. First, and I said this in the first podcast, and I'll say it again. Stop with the call center insurance companies. Find a local agent that knows Florida. They know the lay of the land. Know what you have for insurance. We talked about it before we got started today.
Knows the areas.
Intelligent people all of a sudden didn't realize they didn't have really critical coverages. We got a lot of panic phone calls. Water is running in my house and I don't have flood insurance. What do I do? Try to stop it, and when it's done and safe, dry your house out. There's no good answer. So again, we go back to that normalcy bias. This has never happened, so it's never going to happen. I haven't had a car wreck in 30 years. Why do I need auto insurance? That's not how statistics work, right? That's not odds work. Tomorrow's a new day. Just have that conversation with your agent. Know what you have. We have clients that
I'd like you to tell me if my insurance is right.
We'll have that conversation later. We have a client that lives on the water in Crystal Beach. His homeowner's insurance would be $40,000 a year. He self-insures. The storm hit. He didn't cry. He said, "I made that choice. I put the money away to repair that house." So it was a deliberate decision. It's the client that's caught off guard that goes, "Oh, I didn't know." Or we have clients we gave flood quotes to a year or two ago, 3 years ago, and they flooded. They didn't take the quote back then. I feel horrible for them, but even they, at least it was a little intentional. I guess it's the people that stick their heads in the sand that make me nervous. So just nobody wants to talk about insurance. It's dry. I can't believe you have me on here. Who wants to talk about this stuff? Insurance is
Right now,
horrible.
everybody wants
Well,
to talk about
nobody
it.
needs it until the day we need it.
Prepare.
Yeah, but when the skies are blue and the weather's great and we're all having fun, nobody wants to think about this stuff. So, but it's the same with estate planning. I'm sure, wills and life insurance. It's the people in those professions probably have the same gripe I have.
Yeah.
So let's not stick our head in the sand. Let's know what you have. The same way you make sure you have gas in your tank, food in your freezer, your generator works. You talked about hurricane impact doors and shutters. The same way you're paying attention to that, pay attention to what you have for insurance. And just talk to your local agent.
Then what would you do at your home differently? You moved your cars, so you're
We did. We moved. We took this one serious, and that's, we got lucky
Lucky.
to some extent. Yeah, because we never have in the past. This one just felt different to me, and I don't know why that is, but for us in our home, it would just be a matter of trying to pick the stuff up off the ground, try to mitigate that damage. I got to tell you, when Milton was pointing this way, we took our brand new pool pump out and put it upstairs because we didn't want to go through that again. You can't. The problem now is people are going to start realizing you can't get things. Where you could get it a week after the storm, but yeah, go out today and try to get a pool pump. You're probably 3 months.
Right.
So, we kind of knew about that, the supply and demand, but we did pretty good. We got lucky. And we got lucky. We did do some preparations, but so many of our neighbors, the house right next door, we've been neighbors with them for 20 years, and they got 2 feet of water in their house. They're going to be homeless for a while. And that's heartbreaking.
We have 5 feet in
Yeah.
our friends. And what would you do different, Miss Fawn?
Well, I moved to Florida when I was 15 years old. So it's been a while. And nobody loves Florida more than I do. I live it. I love it. It's my place. And this is the first time I've considered moving. I don't want to move. And so that to not move, I have to have a better plan to make myself safe and secure because of it. So that means figuring about the insurance. I'm getting a new garage door. And then the other thing, which is big, and it sounds silly, people, but the reason I did not evacuate was my cats. Because I'm at elevation. My home is at 26 feet, so I didn't think there was much chance of a surge. I have really good shutters for the windows. I felt a cement block home, felt like I was in a fortress. But I have a camping van. And so if I can just train those cats to shut up for a minute, and just, because I could have left days before and then come back. And that, for me, this time is I want to talk insurance. I'm going to make the changes I need to better fortify the house, and then get out.
A good evacuation plan is priceless. I've talked to a lot of hurricane survivors over the year, and I mean thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And I've never, that I can think of, heard one not evacuate and be okay with it. I've never heard people evacuate and wish they hadn't, but I've heard people stay and wish they had evacuated.
Yeah.
So I think a good and we, for Milton, we didn't leave for Helene, but Cammie and I evacuated for Milton, and we were glad we did. And as it turned out, we did get a roof leak on Milton. We got some damage to our dining room, so hopefully I have roofers on my house today. Rob, if you are, I appreciate it. Thank you. You know Rob.
Right.
So hopefully he's up there today fixing our roof leak. And it happens. I mean,
Do we need new floor?
right? Hopefully not. Hopefully we
good.
got to it quick enough.
Okay,
but,
good.
So we did evacuate. We had a great evacuation plan. I'm not going to share what it is because the hotel I found was great. I don't want it to get too booked up. But have that plan. And I think that when these storms are coming and they're big monsters like that, you wrote it out. Would you want to write it out again?
No.
Yeah,
But remember, I was a reporter for years, so
Yeah.
I've had more experience with hurricanes than most people because I've had to travel to them.
Sure.
And things have changed.
Yeah.
These storms are different. And, Milton, God, you just sat there and you just listened and saw it. And I'm shocked it wasn't much worse for us.
Well,
from that.
we got lucky. Our neighbors to the
Yeah.
south didn't. We got lucky being on the north side of the storm. We got the wind. There was a lot of wind on the north side, but we didn't get the surge. Thank
I
goodness on
know.
Milton. But
And
yeah.
it's hard when it's coming at you because my best friend lives in Sarasota. I'm like, I don't want it to go there
Right.
either. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
it's
my
like,
brother's down there. But
Somebody's going to get it, and we got lucky
Yeah.
on that one. But we don't want to take it for granted. We don't want that bias to
Exactly.
creep in and go, well, we got lucky on that. We'll get lucky on the next one.
Yeah, no, we're gonna prepare for sure. Well, my daughter left. I mean, her partner stayed, watched the house, block, not evac, flood, no flood. But she went to Orlando with the dog and the cat, and it was traumatic getting back. She left
Oh, yeah.
super early going over, easy, but 8.5 hours
Yeah,
trying to get
that's-
back. All the
everybody
people on the
hit that.
side of the roads.
Yep.
So I fear that the next time, if
I
people
know.
go through that, they may not leave next
I know.
time. That's the problem.
And that's just, I think, a component of living here that being able to leave early is great. We left
Yeah.
early. We left on Tuesday.
I sent her on Tuesday too.
Yeah,
That's
and-
why she was in
But
there.
getting back was more of a challenge.
Yeah.
And
no,
gas
but what
and-
I would do, I would leave on Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would leave on Sunday. I'd make sure that by the time I get where I'm going, I've got my tank full,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then sit it out. And
That's
then
right.
when I know it's going to be a smooth drive back,
Yep. And even, we made a point to a few people that they lived in houses like yours that were secure. They felt more secure maybe than the coastal exposures. But if something happens with you, you're not calling 911. They're not
Right.
coming out in the
Not
middle of
coming.
the hurricane. So
Can't even get to you.
Yeah,
half
even
time.
if you-
Bridges are out,
That's
roads
it.
are gone.
So evacuation's important for those reasons. It isn't
Yeah.
just damage to your home.
Right.
It's personal safety.
Right. Well, and we were all, we have a daughter who has a 2-month-old in Tampa Bay. They on a first floor condo. So they
Yeah.
went to Bradenton, and I was like, oh my gosh, what if it hits? It's just,
I know.
I think I still have, I'm not kidding, I am in fight or flight still.
We
Been a
all
long few
are.
weeks.
I'm telling you, we're not right, and everybody is texting. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Like it's like you want. If I need to be texting you, I'm already texting you. That should be the thing. If you want to send well regards, do it through Facebook so that there's a place that I can go see it later, because the texts were horrible. But then now it's over for them, right? They don't
Right.
even think
Right.
it. But now is when the damage
We're just
hit
getting started.
us, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I
That's
know.
it. We're hurting.
Yeah, we got those too, and at one point, I finally, we're just trying to clean the house and muck the stuff out of
Right.
the garage and the pool and the swamp of a pool. It was obviously all completely inundated, and I had to hand the phone to my wife and just ask her, "Can you please answer these texts or something?" It was because it was just every 2 or 3 minutes, and you just couldn't do it. So it's great that everyone wants to check on you, but yeah, you're just trying to
I'm
triage.
getting the am I covered text.
Well, I was getting those too, but the well wishes. It was, and that's great. We have so many
very
friends.
sweet.
Yeah.
We love everybody. I didn't even know how to say it, but I'd be like, please, I haven't talked to you in 3 years.
3 years.
And then, okay, somebody the day of the storm calls me to yell at me because I didn't evacuate.
Yeah.
Okay, it's already started.
Yeah,
Okay.
the ship has sailed.
And then I get a text, would you like to evacuate to my home in, another
Far away.
state? I'm like, it's a little late.
I did ask you that, but I was early. I put it out on Facebook.
No.
If anybody
This
wants
is
to come to
somebody else.
Virginia.
This is not you.
Okay.
We had, I'll tell you too this, you'll get a chuckle out of it. We had people call us a day or two before the storm here at the office and want to add insurance.
Oh, yeah.
Lower deductibles, add insurance. And these insurance companies are hip to it. They shut down as soon as the storm's on the
Oh,
radar.
as soon as-
Yeah, we
right.
go under what are called binding restrictions. We can't alter or add coverage in any way until after the storm passes. So get your insurance early, and federal flood's got a 30-day wait. But that's why. The insurance companies don't want you buying insurance right before the storm hits. That's not how the system works. But we got those calls.
Well, and if you buy a new home, you can't lock in for 30 days for flood.
If there's a loan closing, we can get around it, yeah.
All right. Well, I can't thank you enough. And I picked your brain, I know, but
This was fun. And
We
again,
appreciate it.
great company makes it better, and we appreciate it. And
Exactly.
it'll get easier from here. Again, I've been, spent months and months in other states that have been hit by these storms. And the silver lining is in 6 months or a year, you won't, we'll remember it, but it won't look like
No,
this.
you won't.
And we won't be stressed. It does get better. One thing I know for absolute certain, every day gets a little bit better. The lines at the gas stations are much shorter today than they
Yes.
were yesterday. And tomorrow will be even that.
Yeah.
So it does keep getting better.
right. All right. Well, I appreciate you both. Fawn, love you. James, love you too. We're going to have a second part 2. Going to give James a little breather here in a couple of weeks, and we're going to bring in another amazing person, Mo Freeney, our city, hopefully mayor.
Hopefully mayor.
Let's go, yeah. And she's going to talk about how the city sort of prepped before and after and what they would do different, and really help us on that side too. But again, I can't thank you guys enough, really.
It was great. Thanks
Well,
for
we
doing
can't
it.
thank you. You are such a rock star here. We love you, Linda.
Thank you. I can get you some fan and dehumidifiers at 6:30 in the morning.
Listen, you people have no idea how she steps up.
Thank
If you have an emergency, call Linda B.
That's right. That's my thing. I'm the fire marshal. That's what they call me. Okay. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Have a
Bye.
great day. Stay safe.